it's the leader that creates the culture, and it's the leader that creates the culture of empowerment, of being supportive, of building relationships. I think that one of the key things that has been part of my success is just building relationships of trust with my teams, the people that are on my teams. I always said the people come first, the business comes second.
Welcome to the In Factor, conversations about how great entrepreneurs started, stumbled, and succeeded. I'm Rebecca White, and today's guest is Denise Durgan. Denise is a patient experience performance advisor at Inova Fairfax Medical Campus in Fairfax, Virginia. Before her work in patient experience, Denise worked for more than 25 years at Marriott International and the Ritz-Carlton in sales and marketing leadership roles. After leaving Host, Denise became a certified executive coach, credentialed with the International Coach Federation. She launched her own executive coaching business and worked one-on-one with Fortune 100 leaders. 3 months after she started her company, she was unexpectedly diagnosed with breast cancer. After surgery, Denise had 28 treatments of proton radiation at the Maryland Proton Treatment Center. Her new book, Prescription for Proton Radiation, tells the story of her challenges with getting insurance coverage for this innovative treatment. I hope you enjoy her inspiring story of challenge, hard work, and resilience. Good morning, Denise. Thank you for joining me today on In Factor.
Good morning. It's great to be here.
So I'm very excited to have you on the podcast on In Factor today. You were recommended by one of my students at the University of Tampa. We were just talking about that a few minutes ago, and she was so impressed. And when I had the chance to look at your bio and your background, I too was impressed. It's a very inspiring story. But I always like to go back to the beginning. I know that you worked your way here with a lot of hard work and resilience. So let's talk about that a little bit. What got you started down this incredible leadership journey?
Certainly. And I think Allison Sass, your student that recommended me, will be on the show someday too. So, but in terms of the beginning, yes. I mean, I grew up in Massachusetts, and one of my first jobs in my life is actually one of my favorite. I was an ice cream scooper at Crescent Ridge Dairy. It's actually on National Geographic Best Ice Cream or Most Interesting Place to Visit. And I loved it there. The owners were very hands-on. They empowered all of us as ice cream scoopers. Even if a customer returned the ice cream and ate 3/4 of it, you just give them a new one and don't ask. And it just made work so easy. And I thought to myself, wow, he's really created this environment for us to thrive and to be good, good service professionals and
Right.
have people enjoy themselves. So that was my first job. And I went to UMass Amherst, and I started down the path of journalism. I loved to write. I wanted to be I had this vision of being the first female reporter on the NFL sidelines, and so I started down the path of journalism. And I, as part of the training in journalism, they send you out on these mock interviews, and so I'd have to get sort of in a family's face and ask about somebody that was murdered or something, and that was just too much for me. And then I fell into the hotel industry through changing majors at UMass Amherst, and I just really loved it. And in 1988, I had started with a new leader. I moved from Massachusetts down to the DC area. I live in McLean, Virginia, just a few miles outside of DC. But my first assignment was at Crystal City Marriott, and my boss, Lee LaRochelle, back then in 1988, 89, he's still one of the mentors and sort of on my advisory in my life career. So I was very inspired by his leadership, and he was very much the same as the ice cream place at the Crescent Ridge. He would say, I said to him, what is your secret for success? And he said, I surround myself around great people and let them thrive. And so I knew early on, I really loved to work. I love being self-reliant. I love working on teams, being a good team player. But I had this vision that I really wanted to lead very early on in my career. When I was in CCD class as part of the Catholic faith, I was a coach to a women's basketball team, and they came in first. And I just thought, wow, coaching this young group of women to come in first place, that was sort of my first stake in leadership. And I knew I wanted to do that at Marriott. So that's kind of how I got started. I was inspired by a lot of stories and a lot of good leaders that I learned from.
So there's a lot in there I'd like to dig into. I've been to the Crystal City Marriott, and it is a great location. But one of the things you mentioned, the customer service piece, interestingly, I think I mentioned to you, I was teaching a graduate class last night, and we spent probably 30 to 45 minutes talking about the relationship between customers and sales or customer service representatives, and those people serving them. And the reason this came up is because the students had an assignment for creating a bug list. So we were talking about that opportunities often come out of problems. And so they were making a list of all the things that bugged them. And at the very top was this relationship. And you mentioned how you learned that at a very young age. So I'd love to know, what are just, off the top of your head, a couple of lessons that you learned, how do we turn that around? Because, it seems like there is a real problem with customer service for a lot of companies, even if they give it lip service, or even if they say it's an important value, the experience for the customer or even for the service person is often, less than desirable. You've got angry people on both sides, it seems like. Sometimes.
Yes. Yeah, sometimes. And so I really think it comes down to the training and the empowerment for the employee or the team member, associate, whatever they're called, so that they can feel confident to solve the problem. And if they don't have the training and the tools and the support from the leader, then it's really on the leader. They set the culture and the way that people perform. And so I would say that they have to have the right tools. I mean, I was just recently in a meeting, and we were talking about, if we say I'm sorry and I apologize, like what else can we say to somebody to show that we really care about them and we are sorry that, somebody's late or something like that. So I think that the employees really need to have the tools, the support, and the culture from the leaders to be able to make decisions for customers that might be outside of the box. I mean, that was standard table stakes at Marriott and the Ritz-Carlton, whatever it took. And a lot of times it would just be buying a $5 umbrella to help somebody that forgot theirs at the hotel. It didn't really cost much money. Mm-hmm. And then for the back to the tools, I think that a lot of times in the service industry, as I've spent most of my life and still am, that sometimes we take things personal. Somebody's anger can trigger our own emotion, and we're completely unaware of it. So I would say early on, and I wish early on in my career, I learned about self-awareness later on down the line, but just being aware of what triggers you, somebody's tone of voice or just what they're saying, and, create some space around that.
Mm-hmm. Well, you spent 25 plus years, I think, with Marriott and the Ritz-Carlton, and then you became an executive coach. What led you down the path of starting your own business? Was it that some of these lessons that we're talking about now, and you saw a gap in the marketplace, or were there other reasons as well?
Sure. So I went from Marriott and Ritz to Host Hotels and Resorts, and I was an asset management there for 3.5 years, and I loved it. I learned more. It's the largest hotel owner in the country, and I learned more about the other hotel chains that they owned. I was doing a lot of travel. I was traveling. I loved the team, my leaders. It was a great culture. But after 3.5 years of traveling all over, I really missed my husband, my stepdaughters, my doggies. And I always had this tug within me that my sister owns her own business as a psychotherapist. She's very successful. Mm-hmm. She is amazing, and she's my hero. And then my dad owned his own business his whole life. My mom, when they were married, supported my dad. And then she went off after they divorced and got an undergraduate degree, a master's degree, and she thrived as a human resource professional. So here I have all these wonderful role models for me and my own family, and especially this thread of entrepreneurship. And so I said to my supervisor at Host at the time, and we still stay in touch. He's just fantastic. And I said to Brian, I just feel like now is the time with all the travel I'm doing. I just feel that if I don't try to become an executive coach professionally, then I'm never going to do it. I got my master's degree at 50 years old. So, there's no, it's never too late. And actually, Allison that we spoke about earlier, Allison Sass, it was a professor that she had, John Casleone, and he said to me, you are too conservative in your thinking. You need to just take the leap. It's never going to be a good time. And that was great advice for me. And so between all the travel, I had a great exit from Host. I actually stayed 3 more months. I got my certification, and I really loved being an executive coach, supporting people. I learned a lot about what coaching is and isn't through my certification, my credentials, and I just really loved it.
Well, timing, you mentioned timing, timing was right for you, right? So, when we talk about opportunity recognition in my classes, we always talk about the importance of timing and timing for the entrepreneur and timing for the marketplace. So when you took this leap, was it everything you dreamed it would be? What was your experience as an entrepreneur after being very successful in a corporate environment?
I'll never forget that day. It was September, I think it was September 6th in 2017. And I woke up and I said, oh my gosh, I don't have a consistent paycheck. And as my financial advisor said, some people kind of do that on the side and then take the leap, but you just really took the leap, So what was that like? First of all, financially, I had saved. And even though I'm married, I was just very thoughtful about having enough to be able to do this and try this on my own, And so I just couldn't wait to get started. And I found the certification, the place where I wanted to get certified, Center for Executive Coaching. Andrew Knightlick's program is amazing. And I just went into learning mode. And I consider myself a lifelong learner. Spending this time with you is just really incredible for me. I love new experiences. And so it was very exciting. I learned early on that some of the business skills that I have were easily transferable. Many of them. But then when you're running your own business, you're running your own books, you're finding your own niche. And so something that has been, I think, just who I am as a professional, as a person, but I really love to build relationships, genuine relationships. I'm friends with customers I had in the 90s with Marriott and still stay in touch. And so I relied on these relationships just to branch out and market myself as an executive coach. I learned also early on from mistakes and not to go too wide in your market, to be as an executive coach more of a niche. Mm-hmm. And so I had to really make an adjustment. I was doing more career coaching, and then I moved back into executive coaching at a law firm, coaching at Georgetown University through their master's programs, coaching professionals. And so those are some of the lessons I learned, just how to adjust and how to be real niche in your market. I was at a Georgetown hosts these, before the pandemic, but these in-person forums, and Ken Langone, who you probably know, who started Home Depot, he was the guest speaker. And something I just love to do in my career, in my life, is just think about how I can make a relationship maybe with a new person. And I really was inspired by him. I read his book, and I walked up after, gave him a card, and just said how much I appreciated his book. And I thought, I have nothing to lose. I wanted to get his advice as an entrepreneur. And so he actually, a few weeks later, wrote back to me a handwritten note. And he said, my advice to you is to stay in a swim lane that you're really good at. Yeah. And so I was like, that makes sense, because that was sort of the lessons I learned on my own from being too wide and really needing to narrow. So, that's how I would describe it.
And that's really great advice. You took a step out, and so many entrepreneurs now are building businesses around themselves and what they can do. And so kind of solo entrepreneurs like you're talking about. And so you have to depend just on yourself. And of course, lots of help from supporters and that sort of thing. And you certainly can purchase assistance as well. But the interesting thing about really having a focus is that how hard it can be when you've done exactly what you did, and that is you gave up your other source of income, and then you've got potential opportunities, but they're not quite in that lane, that swim lane that you were talking about. And so turning those down, saying no, because it's not where you really need to be headed, takes a lot of insight and a lot of self-awareness and a lot of wisdom and a lot of understanding and sort of nerves of steel sometimes, right?
It certainly does. I mean, my training at Marriott and Ritz-Carlton and even at Host, just, we don't say no. We find a way to say yes and to help the customer and to find opportunities. So it was very difficult for me to pass a client to somebody else, knowing that I could help them, but knowing that that would detract from, my core purpose.
What you needed to do, but the highest and best use of your time. That's one of the rules I try to live by, is highest and best use of my time. And it's hard sometimes. It's really a challenge. So how many years did you do your executive coaching? Because I think now you're back, you're working back in a medical clinic, right? There in Fairfax. So can you tell us about that transition and, what led you down that path?
Certainly. So 3-4 months after I was certified as an executive coach and started with Georgetown and finding clients, I went and got a routine mammogram and I was diagnosed with breast cancer just out of the blue. And it was really heartbreaking and it really shook me to the core. Not something I ever would have expected. I'm a very healthy person, eat healthy and work out. And so I kept going. I remember I had to take I was in a secondary course with a master coach, and these were one-on-one small cohorts. And then I had to coach a real client and have her listen and pass this through to the International Coach Federation. And so I had to have a mastectomy the day I was supposed to do one of my last trainings with her. And I said, I want to actually be on this call with you 2 days or the day after. And she said, how about you give it a couple of weeks? So I stuck with it and I ended up earning a new client while I was in treatment, and I was in radiation treatment and remember just being very burned at the end and my whole body feeling burned. And here I was facilitating a course, which I really, really loved to do. And so I stuck with it, and then the pandemic hit. And in between, I started noticing the parallels between I consider myself the soul of service. I mean, I love to serve others, and starting with the ice cream. Mm-hmm. And so I started noticing these parallels of the hotel industry and the healthcare industry. And when it was really, really great, I really connected with some of the healthcare professionals. I would write reviews and surveys, talk to them, let them know how much I appreciated them. And then when it was off course, I could not believe how off course it could be, off track, and messaging in cancer care. And so I started getting really drawn to this whole universe of the patient experience while I was coaching. And so I reached out to somebody that I used to work with on my largest team at Marriott. I ran a region for Marriott. And I said, you're a patient experience officer. What does that mean? Can we connect? And we hadn't talked probably in 10 or 12 years. We chit-chatted and she said, the Barrel Institute, this is an organization that is committed to elevating the human experience in healthcare. And so I applied to become a member. And then I was asked to be on their Global Patient Family Advisory Board, representing the patient voice in healthcare. And so it was really from that experience. And then I started branching out more and volunteering within the patient experience that I started to really have this transition that I really should be, I think, in healthcare, being more intentional with my coaching skills, knowing I'm not perfect too, but and helping others maybe be able to communicate differently, help them solve problems. And so I followed that. I went through the treatments and things and I kept working, but I followed that passion through just the love of the patient experience that I learned from the Barrel Institute. So yeah, I started at Inova Health System at Inova Fairfax Hospital, Inova Fairfax Medical Campus here in Fairfax, Virginia in February of this year. So it's now September and I really love it.
Yeah. So I'm fascinated by this because I know that the healthcare industry has a lot of challenges. And you brought up the patient experience. And, I know that there was a time when patients would go in to see a doctor and a doctor would sit down and listen and spend time with them. And then the financial system, I guess, made it harder for doctors and to take the time to be with patients. And is this kind of what do you try to address, the physicians, the nurses, the other healthcare providers, and how they interact with the patients? Or do you work with the patients? Or, what is your role in that relationship?
Sure. As a patient experience performance advisor, I support the healthcare professionals as well as the patients and families. And so in whatever that they need me to do. And so whether it's solving a business process problem or challenge or helping a patient and family, it can be very different every day. And I just really enjoy it because I feel that I'm making a difference in how I can help support on both sides. And I just really feel for the healthcare professionals. They have been through so much. And I'm coming in at a time after the pandemic. And heroes, it's not even a big enough word for the people that I work with.
Mm-hmm.
They're just really incredible. Sometimes I feel like they're at such a high level of performance that, how really can I help? But, I'm there for everyone. And I really enjoy it. Our hospital, even through the pandemic, I support the women's and children's line, and our women's hospital just ranked 6th in the country for a lot of different metrics under the U.S. News and World Report. And that really means a lot to the team because it's not really the number, it's the story behind the number. It's these experiences that they're creating that the patients are telling us that it matters to them, how they're being treated. Like you said, communication. They're just a well-oiled team and of professionals that just really love what they do, and they do it so well.
One of the things that we talked about in my class last night was empathy for the other person, and on both sides. And you brought up the issue, patients get very frustrated because their doctors don't have enough time with them, but doctors are caught, and not just doctors, but all the healthcare professionals are caught in this, especially now, dealing with this pandemic, with this overload of expectations on the system. And the pandemic's been really interesting, I think, for all of us, and painful for many and challenging. But it's also created some opportunities. And it sounds like in your particular case that, you've been able to work through a lot. You've worked through your own illness. You've worked through this pandemic. And I'm just curious, is work for you somewhat therapeutic? Does doing all of this help you deal with all the challenges that you've been facing personally and that you've seen our country and our world facing?
I really do. I really feel like it's just the right place for me to be, and things happen for a reason. And then sometimes you also have to go for things, things don't get handed to you. They never have been for me. I've always worked for them. So yes, I think it's a place where I feel like it's just, it sounds so cliche, but it's meant to be. And in my own experiences, in my cancer diagnosis, my medical team was just over the top phenomenal. They were just amazing communicators. They still are. And I really appreciate them. So I went from patient of all of my physicians to team member at the hospital. And it just feels like it was the right time. And so I'm truly grateful. Yeah.
Well, you mentioned hard work, and it's clear that you don't sit around.
No, I do not.
And interestingly, I'm someone that also used the pandemic to pursue something that, a book basically that I had wanted to write for a while. But I understand, speaking of books, that you have a book that came out of all of this experience. So on top of everything that you've been doing, the self-care and the healthcare personally and transitioning and training and learning and meeting new people, you've also written a book called Prescription for Proton Radiation. And I know because I've read about it a little bit that there's a story behind why you wrote this book. But would you tell our listeners a little bit about that story, and then tell us a little bit about the book and the audience for the book and who might be interested in the book?
Oh, thank you so much. Yes. So when I learned that I unexpectedly needed radiation, they found more cancer in my lymph node after my surgery. And so it was unexpected. So I was prescribed radiation treatment, and I sort of fell into proton radiation, a more precise and highly targeted radiation that it protects the healthy tissues and organs. And so, for example, left-sided breast cancer, proton radiation, it will protect the heart much more effectively than other types of radiation. I just compare it to photon. And so once I found proton radiation, which is in the book, and it's a funny story how I stumbled into it, and I was eventually prescribed protons from my physician. Dr. Eblin, who's just phenomenal, he said to me and the team at the Maryland Proton Treatment Center, so this is the right treatment for you. This is, what I'm prescribing for you based on your health background and your family history. And so just so that you know, it might take a little bit to get insurance to prove it, because they typically don't do that right away. And so I thought, okay, well, if they typically don't do that right away, maybe that's just a business process with insurance. Being so naive to this and being just a few weeks out of surgery, and people talk about a mastectomy very easily these days, but it is a removal of a body part, and it's pretty intense.
Traumatic, yes.
Yeah. And so I had this optimism thread in me and my soul. And I thought, oh, it'll go great. But then at the same point, I have this part of me that is plan B. What if it doesn't? And so this took a few weeks for Dr. Eblin and Allison at the team at the Maryland Proton Center to get my insurance to approve payment for this radiation therapy. And each week that went by and my cancer treatments were delayed, I had this just revelation that when I am ready, I'm coming back and I need to tell my story, and I need to find other patients, and I need to figure out, is this happening in cancer care only? Are patients being delayed cancer treatments, waiting for insurance to approve it? I mean, this does not sound right. It's really backwards. Especially with my background in service, I kept thinking to myself, if we let somebody wait to check into a hotel for 10 minutes, they would be really upset. And so here I am trying to get the insurance company to approve it, of which my husband and I pay for insurance. And it was a denial appeal. And this happens every day. It's called the peer-to-peer review process. It's first called the prior authorization, where the physician submits, and then they have a peer-to-peer decide, well, we're going to pay for it or not. At the Maryland Proton Treatment Center, my treatments were the same as regular photon radiation. And so there was no cost difference. I'm a business professional. I understand maybe the healthcare company looks at my health and decides that a $60,000 treatment is not worthy. And so we can do a $25,000. Okay, so as cold as that sounds, that's probably how they're thinking, but mine was cost neutral. It cost the same. And they still kept delaying and denying my approvals for it. And so Dr. Eblin said to me, you could talk to your congressman, and when you're ready. I mean, he's so nice and still is. And I thought, oh, I'm going to do that. I'm going to help people. This is when my pain became my purpose. And in October of 2020, I enrolled in the Creators Institute program. There was 155 of us authors. I picked as a first-time author a nonfiction book about science and physics, and I interviewed 15 patients. I told my own story. I have 9 radiation oncologists, including the chief medical officer at Barium, one of the makers of the proton machine, the one I had at the Proton Center. And I wanted to tell the story of proton radiation. Sometimes patients don't know about it because sometimes the physicians don't have it in their hospital and they don't offer it, which is not good. It shouldn't be that way. That happened. I've met people through social media that have found me even before the book was published. So I'm aiming to educate about proton radiation in terms of the audience who would like to read the book. Anyone that needs radiation, whether it's a benign tumor or a cancerous tumor, but to educate about what this modality does and how it really does protect the quality of life for the patient and helps protect the healthy tissues and structures. And then two, from our own patient stories, learn about the treatment and how we did so many of us did so well in the treatment. I interviewed head coach Ron Rivera from the Washington football team, formerly the Washington Redskins. He's one of the patients I interviewed for the book. I mean, he talks about his experience and how for a few days the machine wasn't working for him, and he had to have the other radiation for his throat and how debilitating that was. It's in the book. And so all of us talked about the treatment because we were so passionate about it. It's not very well known. There's only 37 centers and they're growing in the country. But for patients to know how it feels to be in radiation, sometimes people say, oh, you just needed radiation, you didn't need chemo. There's no just needed radiation. Radiation is not a walk in the park, you know? Mm-hmm. And so I wanted patients to know what it felt like to be in radiation. I wanted to know from a patient's perspective before I wrote the book. And there was one book that I referenced in the book, and he had prostate cancer. And so I knew from reading his book what it could feel like. And so I want patients to know what it can feel like. And then also I provide a lot of resources for how patients can navigate the insurance system. Medicare, Medicaid tends to approve it more regularly with supplemental plans or not. But in the private insurance marketplace, this submission, appeal, denial, appeal, it happens all the time. And it's really not right. And so I want patients to know that if you continue with your doctor's support, I'm not a doctor, I say that at the beginning, and this is from a patient's perspective, that patients, if with their doctor's support, they can still appeal and advocate for themselves and get their cases overturned. And many of ours weren't, and some were not. But I wanted to provide resources. And then if people want to legislate, provide those resources too. So this morning I found out it's number 6 in new releases on Amazon in the cancer category, and number 1 in nuclear physics. And so I'm no nuclear physicist, obviously, but the physicians in the book really helped provide just such credibility to the modality and be able to answer the question, what should a patient know about protons? So I know that's a long answer, but I think you can tell
it's fantastic.
I'm very passionate about paying it forward. I really feel like I'm called to pay it forward because I had such a horrible experience. And ultimately, my case was overturned. So I had insurance pay for the treatment.
That's wonderful. So no, it's great answer. Not too long and just fantastic. And I'm so proud of you and congratulations on the success of your book. I know it's going to help so many people. And I love that. You know, I am curious, how did you go about getting yours approved, and how long did that take for you personally?
So they started the process in late March, early April, and I finally got approved on the first week of May. So it was at least, I think it was almost 2 months of delay. And
in cancer, that's a lot, right?
It's a lot
with
because
cancer treatment. Yeah.
Yeah. And I remember asking one of the doctors, where does so naive, where does the cancer go after it goes in the lymph node? Well, we don't know. That's why you need to be in radiation. We don't know. Oh my goodness. Oh no. Yeah. I mean, they were honest. And so how I got it overturned is Dr. Eblin and Allison Scull at the Proton Center. They work tirelessly on my case, but they do it day in and day out. He now works at another facility in Virginia, but they ended up submitting a 9-page letter of medical necessity, going through comparing the modalities between proton and photon in this letter of medical necessity. And the fact that Dr. Eblin really demanded that he speak to a radiation oncologist at the insurance company. He was not speaking to a radiation oncologist. So, I mean, it could have been a primary care physician making a decision in radiation when they've never rotated in that field. And so I think it's the combination of the letter of medical necessity, as well as Dr. Eblin speaking to a radiation oncologist on the other end. They ended up overturning my case. And I started it was a Friday, they overturned my case. I started treatment on Monday. Mm-hmm. But it's heartbreaking to hear some of the stories in the book of people whose cases didn't get overturned, and then people can't afford it. And so the proceeds of my book are going to 2 pediatric organizations, that 2 of the pediatric brain cancer patients in my book are supporting. And their cases got approved right away, which is fabulous. And one of the moms said to me, I just can't believe that people wouldn't get approved. It makes no sense if the physician orders the prescription, So there's a little bit of telling the story of how insurance works and sort of going behind the curtain so people can know what they're getting into.
Right.
And I've got a lot of research in the book, and it's not just in cancer care. This happens day in and day out in the medical world, and it's just not right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it can be. I mean, I'm a pretty highly educated person, and I know it's very frustrating for me oftentimes to figure things out. And I know that there are a lot of people that don't know where to turn at all. And so I know your book's going to help a lot of people. So thank you for doing that. And congratulations on your own health and your own success with everything. It's wonderful to hear. This podcast, I mean, this is a fabulous story. A lot of the listeners of this podcast are really interested in understanding how to build or run a successful business. And, as I listen to you talk, I hear things like communication and empathy and leadership. I'd love to hear your thoughts on kind of a summary of what do you think makes a company successful, and where should an entrepreneur be focusing when they're trying to build the culture for a successful company?
Sure. I mean, I think starting from the beginning, just like we talked about, really finding your niche of how you're helping solve problems. So what is the problem that needs to be solved in the marketplace, and how do I solve that? And then being able to be very clear on the description of how you solve that, not in big paragraphs and all of this, but just how you can do that as a business owner. And then once you've got a team, I mean, for me, it was just me. So it was a little bit different. But because I've worked in these other organizations, I have just such an appreciation, and as well as seeing other entrepreneurs, it's the leader that creates the culture, and it's the leader that creates the culture of empowerment, of being supportive, of building relationships. I think that one of the key things that has been part of my success is just building relationships of trust with my teams, the people that are on my teams. I always said the people come first, the business comes second. And I mean that sincerely. And that was part of my success, is my team knew I always had their back. If they were running into problems, my responsibility is to remove those rocks and boulders out of their way so that they can thrive. Talk to customers if hopefully I can, because I love talking to customers, not just as a problem, but proactively take them out to lunch, get to know them, build relationships. So I think really those are the key ingredients, but it really starts with the leader's vision of the culture. And at my biggest assignment at Marriott, I had 113 hotels. And on day one, when I opened this office, I was very clear on what our mission was going to be and our vision. And I asked the team, I don't know, there was about 170 of them, to envision, close their eyes and envision 3 years from now. And how will they describe our team? And I made a commitment that we would have our spirit to serve our community, the spirit to serve each other, the spirit to serve our stakeholders, and the spirit to serve our customers. There were 4 pillars, and all that we did, as long as we were doing something around those 4 pillars, we were doing what we were supposed to. And hopefully we'll have some fun along the way and build relationships. And, I did that assignment back in 2008. And I will say that a lot of the members on my team I am still connected with, and some even have been purchasing the book. And it's just, I think those are the key ingredients. I really miss that team, and I miss leading them. They were just really phenomenal. But it really comes down to that and being very clear.
Yeah, I love how you identified your 4 pillars, because, one of the things I've found as a leader over the years is that you have to have something to go back to when the decisions are tough. Yes. And I think that's really, really valuable advice.
Yes, it is. I mean, I remember when it was 2008 and the economy crashed, and we just launched this office in sales and no one was booking meetings. And so I said to the team, well, we can't spend money, so the top salespeople can. This sounds ridiculous because everybody wears jeans now, but we couldn't back then in 2008. Mm-hmm. So the top salespeople can wear jeans. They're just going to make that decision. It wasn't very popular with some in the company, but we weren't customer facing, and the team loved it. And so as long as, like you said, we're going back to one of those pillars, and that was my spirit to serve each other, my spirit to serve the team. So yeah, I think just being very clear on that and staying true to it is, it makes it easy for people. They know what they're supposed to do, and they know the leader will have their back.
Right, right. And as a leader, it also is sort of a North Star. It's a guiding principle. One of your principles, I think, has been giving back and helping others. You've built your whole career around it. What kind of advice would you have for an entrepreneur about giving back? And do you think that's an important part of what every entrepreneur, maybe all of us, need to be thinking about?
I do. I mean, and I think it's hard for entrepreneurs, especially starting out. It depends on the sales, et cetera. I understand that, but I think the way an entrepreneur's brand is perceived in the marketplace, especially now, has a lot to do with how they are interacting with the community around them. And to be able to go to an organization that aligns with something that might be personal to them. A friend of mine owns a very successful hair salon here in DC, in the DC area. And, she's very committed to helping working women. And so she'll do, coat drives and suit drives and things like this. And so I think that when the time is ready for the entrepreneur, I almost think it's a must-have. It's not even a decision, but it should, really align with maybe the business, but also maybe the business owner, something that they're passionate about. And those that receive on the other end are always grateful. And it just makes things better when we contribute in that way. My call to do more volunteer, ironically, 20 years ago on 9/11, I said to myself, I had a plane ticket that day, and I was ready to go to present in Chicago, fly from DC. And I was getting an MRI for my knee. I was running a marathon that day, and the technician said, "Hey, you probably should watch the news." And so when all of those things transpired and our hotels were helping triage at the Pentagon, I kept thinking to myself, if I was on one of those planes, what would I have regretted in my life? And I thought, from now on, I will not say that I will regret giving back to the community. I will give back. I went and donated blood at Inova, and I volunteered at Inova, where now I work, but I volunteered for 10 years in their pediatric unit. And so I know that's a little bit digressing from the entrepreneurs, but I want to say that that's just really where it came from, and I continue to do so. And I hope that other entrepreneurs would too, just find something that really aligns with them and really aligns with their integrity, their character, what they're about.
Yeah, I think it's a fantastic message, because a lot of being successful as an entrepreneur, I think, is resilience and, being able to execute past failure. And obviously, I mean, you and I both have been working through three pretty major crises. If you look back at 9/11 and the Great Recession, and now COVID. And it's very interesting. In fact, some of the research I'm doing is on resilience, and I'm looking at companies and how they manage companies that are 20 plus years old and have survived through those three timeframes. And the hotel industry, interestingly, I think is one that got hit really hard by all three.
Yes.
Some industries, I'm on a board, a public company board that sells luxury yachts and boats. And we did fantastic through COVID, because it turns out that's something you can do, and socially distance. But the hotel industry and a lot of the travel and tourism is going to take a while, I think. They're getting hit again right now with this uptick in cases. So really great story of resilience, Denise. It's been such a blessing for me today to talk to you and hear your story. And you have such an amazing spirit, and you've demonstrated, I think, the real entrepreneurial spirit. And I don't think you always have to have your own company the whole time to do that. And so I love your story. One of the things I always ask, and you've already given great advice, but I always end by asking, what's one piece of advice? If you could distill everything, or if you could come up with one thing that you don't want people to forget, or that you'd like them to remember after they listen to this, what would that be?
Certainly, I think it would, I know it would be building relationships of trust. I think it's so important. And for your customers, for the community, for your teammates, the people maybe above you, your boards, just relationships of trust, to being known to be a person of integrity really means something. So I think building relationships and having fun with those relationships, all these people I've met along the way, Stacy's pita chips that you see in the grocery store.
Mm-hmm.
Stacy worked alongside of me scooping ice cream back then.
Nice.
Talk about relationships, so to have fun with the relationships and realize also that, they're just, it's just, for me, it's been really the reason why I've succeeded is through that. So I don't think that's very eloquent, but
it's perfect.
That's how I would distill it. Yeah.
It's perfect. Thank you, Denise. So how can our listeners find out more about you and your book and what you're up to these days?
Certainly. I'm on LinkedIn under Denise Durg Maloney. And in terms of my book, it's right now on Amazon. It will be in Barnes & Noble soon, very soon. But Prescription for Proton Radiation, just put that in the Amazon search and it will come up. And I'm going to be loading my author bio there too. So I would love for people to check out the book. You never know when you might need it, and or to donate it to a hospital or something like that, or library. But those are the places. And I can't tell you, Dr. White, I'm just so honored and thrilled to spend this time with you today. And another time, I'd love to hear more about your book and your journey. But it's just, you really gave me a lot of energy and sunshine today. And I really appreciate the time.
Thank you. The feeling's mutual. Thank you, Denise.
Thank you. Take care.
If you enjoyed this episode and would like to learn more about entrepreneurship, we would love it if you hit that subscribe button. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of InFactor.